Welcome to Eat, Sleep, Wine, Repeat, a podcast for all you wine lovers who, if you're like me, just cannot get enough of the good stuff. I'm Yanina Doyle, your host, brand ambassador, wine educator, and sommelier. So stick with me as we dive deeper into this ever-evolving, wonderful world of wine. And wherever you are listening to this, cheers to you. Welcome back, wine friends. This is part 2 with the brilliant wine journalist Kathleen Willcox, whose work you can find in Wine Searcher, The Drinks Business, Full Pour, Wine Enthusiast. Now, if you haven't listened to part 1, go back as we were discussing the evolution of wine styles, winemaking, and interesting wines that you may want to try and have never heard of. But this week, we're diving into a truly fascinating topic: why Bhutan might just become one of the world's next great wine regions, and how vineyards close to the sun are cleverly evading the challenges of climate change. Trust me, you won't want to miss this. Kathleen has some incredible insights to share. But before we go to the episode, somebody asked me recently why I don't actually promote the other side of my business, and say, you know what? They are absolutely right. I spend so much time talking about wine education, storytelling, and the amazing guests on this podcast, but I don't really mention the events and the tastings that I offer. So since it's still early in the year and I have the power to give away my sponsorship space, I'm giving it to me. And so if you didn't know, I offer a whole range of wine experiences that are designed to be personalized, that can be perfect for any occasion. So whether you're in the UK, I can come to you in person, or if you are anywhere else in the world, or maybe you just want to keep your slippers on and prefer an online session, then I have you covered. So I host wine parties, and of course they're educational, but even more importantly, they are entertaining, and you pick the theme. So if you want to taste lesser known wine grapes, or you want to work on your blind tasting skills. Last year, I helped a couple plan a wine tasting birthday party with a tour of Italy theme, complete with regional pairings and quizzes. I helped guide a bride and groom through selecting wines that paired beautifully with their food menu whilst staying within their budget, which is the most important. So if you want wine training for your team or your business, you want to up your own wine game, or you just want some one-on-one wine consultation, drop me an email at Yanina, spelt Janina, Yanina at eatsleepwinerepeat.co.uk, or you can direct message me on Instagram at eatsleep_winerepeat, and let's make your next wine adventure unforgettable. But I think for now I've plugged myself enough. Pour yourself that glass of wine and enjoy the episode. I want to pick your brain about another article. So this article was, will Bhutan be the world's next great wine region? Oh my goodness, really? Wow.
I know.
Yes.
I know.
So
Surprise.
Surprise. Can you introduce Bhutan to our audience and explain why this might be an interesting candidate for becoming a wine region?
Well, it's definitely the first time grapes have really been planted there in a commercial way, which is fascinating. I guess that they were kind of not quite on the spice route, and, Rome never conquered them, which is really how new wine regions were established for many, many years. And this is, I said this in the article, but to me, it just accentuates how crazy it is. This is the first new wine country since New Zealand, which was 150 years ago. And I mean, the climate is perfect for wine growing. It's in theory, it's high elevation. You have a range of microclimates. You have a range of different soils that are great for grape planting. And so it's kind of like the new Wild West, where they're going to have to do a lot of experimentation and a lot of analysis. But luckily, the country's really invested in it, which is huge. Because when you get a country who invests in the wine culture and is willing to contribute money to scholarship and science and experimentation, then it's going to happen a lot faster than it would if it was just a private enterprise and a few rich people funding it out of their own pockets. So they're motivated because they know, I mean, the wine industry is what? I mean, it's multi-billion dollars. They know that bringing in more tourists, and they also get every tourist who goes to Bhutan has to pay a special tax so that they can remain carbon negative, which is incredible. The fact that the country is so environmentally pristine also, of course, makes it perfect for wine, but makes it perfect for everything, really. There are so few places on the world where there are people in and out of those places, and they're able to maintain really purity and kind of the pristine nature.
I thought that was absolutely fascinating. I had no idea that there was a carbon neutral country, and this is the only one in the world.
Right. It's amazing.
And so, as we were talking about on the episode before, for anyone who's thinking, oh, do you know what? I really want to champion these sustainable wineries. I want to drink wine knowing that I'm doing my part, blah, blah, blah. When Bhutan starts releasing wines, which of course I think is on any kind of global stage, I think we are waiting here.
Yes.
But how incredible to say, do you know what? I'm going to choose when there's a Bhutan wine in front of you and another wine from another country. Wow, if I do this for this country that is focused on, I was looking up the country, they give free electricity to the farmers so that they don't have to burn wood. There are things in place making sure that, clean energy, because they've got it coming from the rivers. So quite clearly building a wine industry. And I think, did you say in your article that the government is absolutely focused on making sure that this is still done in exactly the same way the other farmers with the fruit are doing, so everything stays super clean?
Everything will stay pristine. Yes. And the people behind the company are also really committed to respecting the environment and making sure that everything is done correctly.
Well, so now you mentioned the company. So this is the Bhutan Wine Company. So how did this even come about? And how did you find out about the Bhutan Wine Company to be able to write about this?
So and I don't know if I'm actually pronouncing his last name correctly. I hope I am. Michael Juergens is the co-founder with his wife, Anne Cross. And Anne actually, in some ways, kind of is the secret brainchild behind it, because she became fascinated with the country 30 years ago, and just as a place to go and a place to visit. And the pair are passionate wine lovers, and they're also passionate athletes. So they basically base their vacation, and it sounds kind of awesome. It sounds a little bit too hardcore for me, but they base their vacation around doing like these marathon, triathlon, but it also has to ideally be a place that produces wine. So they do their big triathlon, and then they go explore wine country, which, I mean, can you think of anything cooler? But when they came to Bhutan, that was one of the few places where they couldn't explore wine country because there's no wine country there. And so he actually ended up talking to people while he was there and just, innocently asking, why isn't there a wine region here? I don't understand. And then they just said, well, it's just never been done. So he came home and he was a partner at Deloitte. And so he just researched it, and for fun, basically, like he didn't think anything would come of it, and sent it to a bunch of people in Bhutan. And then he returned, he stayed in touch with everyone. And one thing led to another. And all of a sudden government officials were hitting him up and asking him, what's the deal? Do you think that this is viable? And he talked Anne into quitting her job. She was in charge of marketing projects with Disney and doing Barbie projects. I think Mattel, actually, not Disney. She's taken it on and is spearheading it. And the pair hired a winemaker over there and a staff over there, but they go over and visit all the time.
Amazing. Although being this landlocked country, so for anybody who's not sure where it is, kind of in between China and India.
Yes.
Logistics, you said this is potentially probably going to be the hardest part, having to get everything in.
Right. I mean, there wasn't even a form of currency until the 1960s, which is, so it's definitely landlocked. And, I think it's something like 14,000 square miles, 300 north to south. So getting trucks in and over mountains, and it's going to be challenging, but the government is committed. They don't want to be isolated. And, the Great Himalayas just offer such an incredible terroir that it's something that everyone they realize that this is a real opportunity for the country and for the world. I mean, for the wine loving public. I do think it's going to be a long time before we see Bhutan wine on a large scale. They did their first vintage in 2023, but it was basically, a barrel. And so eventually they say that there should be 2,000 acres under vine soon. But as you know, it's not like corn where you plant it and then you're done. Really, it takes about 10 years to have a really fully mature, thriving, working vineyard. So that's a long time coming. But they would like to have 360,000 cases eventually. I mean, that's their vision.
That's fantastic. I mean, and I suppose the point is, like they've said that they've released this, there's 1 barrel's worth, and it's a blend. And I think there's a blend of red and white in there. And they haven't quite said.
They wouldn't tell me. Like, tell me which grapes. And they decided to keep it a mystery. But I would love it. I mean, I'd be very curious to try it one day.
Did they tell you how many grapes? I think, did you say, I don't know if I read it from you, 17 varieties, something like that so far planted?
Yes. I mean, they're really experimenting because it's a totally new terroir. So maybe Sauvignon Blanc will work. Oh, but maybe Chardonnay will. And because there's so many microclimates, I mean, if you look at a country like Portugal, it's a small country, but you look at the different climates there, the Douro, you've got these incredible mountain ranges. Vinho Verde, it's green, it's lush, it's rainy. Alentejo, it's a desert. So just because it's one country, that does not mean that they can grow. Well, and I mean, if you look at France too, but France is much bigger. So it'll be cool to see like what wine regions emerge and which grapes thrive.
Absolutely. I mean, just looking at it and trying to do my own research, you realize there's going to be lots of different soils. There's going to be lots of different elevations that they can play around with. So let's see. But I believe Tempranillo is definitely something that they're kind of maybe going with. You said Sauvignon Blanc already and Cab Sav and stuff. So absolutely fantastic. Is there any kind of plan, or did they discuss at all how they would start trying to go about exporting?
I don't think they have a plan yet, but I think that I would be surprised if they had a really hard time. I mean, it's just such a novel thing that I think that there will be larger companies very interested in getting their wine on shelves, certainly in the US and the UK and larger markets the UK people love to travel and they're very curious about different countries. So I could see that being a relatively easy. I think the hardest thing is going to be establishing grapes and figuring out what works where quickly. Because really to make it viable, you kind of have to move fast.
And to be honest, like you said, I mean, at least for anybody who's not aware of in a vineyard, once your roots have established, if in, several years' time, they do realize actually this Sauvignon Blanc isn't working and we want to change it for a richer red, you can take off the tops effectively and graft on a different variety in a year later. So there is, at least once there's some root establishment, they could change things up and mix it. You don't have to wait another 3-4 years for a vine to establish.
That's very true.
It'll be interesting, but I think you said that the first vineyards went in 2019. So this is really genuinely new.
Right. Absolutely.
So exciting. Do you think, there's a tax at the moment for tourism to make sure that the country stays pristine clean. Do you think that this could be a place that actually starts dealing with wine tourism, that this will be, can you see in 10 years' time, people coming to Bhutan to have their wine vacations?
I would love to see that. And I would love to be there doing it myself. No, I do think that because people are very curious. And I think that there's been a lot more tourism interest post-COVID. And in that region of that area of the world in general, I feel like there's a certain kind of people have done America, people have done Europe, and I think they're kind of moving on. And I think that people would be very curious. Do I think it's going to be, everyone? No, I think people are still going to be going to Disney, but I think that there's a certain type of traveler who would love to go there.
Amazing. Okay, so this is going to lead me into taking you to another article that you wrote that I thought was quite fascinating and interesting. In Bhutan, there's a lot of high altitude plantings, and this also might be something that's going to be really useful as many of our countries that we know and love for grapes are getting rather hot. So you wrote an article, How Vineyards Closer to the Sun Are Evading Climate Change. And this is also in the drinks business. So my question for everyone listening, why is high altitude grape farming becoming, do you think, such a significant topic in the wine industry, and that you've written this article?
Well, I mean, there are all of these kind of alarming studies. We've all read them. Something like 85% of the classic wine regions that we know and love could be endangered by 2050 if something isn't done. But, and this is a big but, in a lot of those regions, if you just move up in elevation, it does really help because you get a greater diurnal shift, which means the contrast in temperatures between day and night. And that helps. Like, let's say you plant Cabernet Sauvignon and during the growing season, it's pretty much 90 degrees all the time. That's way too much heat. It's going to create really overbaked, sloppy, kind of fat flavors. But then if it goes down to 40 or 50 degrees at night, it locks in the brightness and the acidity. So you have balance, which is what we all love. And the higher elevation you go, the more you get the diurnal shift. You also tend to get more wind, which we kind of touched on before. Wind really knocks disease off of grapes, which allows them to thrive and to dry off. If it has been raining, they're going to dry off a lot more easily if it's windy or if the bunches are loose. So those are, a few of the reasons that the weather's better. And weather and climate, that's what makes for a good or a bad wine.
And I suppose as well, not only as you go up in altitude, you get cooler, but you also are closer to the sun. So the UV exposure is going to thicken up the grapes.
Exactly. Create concentration.
Absolutely. And I think as well, typically, you're slowing down the ripening, you're getting thicker skins, you're going to get smaller berries typically. So that's that kind of skin to pulp ratio. So then actually the polyphenols. And so you've got these lovely structured tannins and more color and more flavor and more complexity. And it's this interesting science.
It is. And I didn't really get into it in the article because I'm not a health person. But I did read a lot about how, like you said, with that the way that the grapes are developing, they're in many ways more packed with antioxidants and flavonoids, which of course, I mean, we talk all the time in the wine industry about some of the mixed messages that are being sent by WHO and other health organizations. So that could also be, you could basically create a healthier glass of wine that way from higher elevation.
That is fascinating. And it's not something in my head. Like I always say to people, things like Tanit, the grape variety, is known anyway, regardless of altitude, as having some of the highest level of antioxidants because of the polyphenols, because of the thick skins. And I'm such an advocate for people seeing the health benefits for obvious reasons. But there are so many studies out there. And of course, just for everybody listening, if you have a large glass of wine or more, then you start going away from the health benefits because alcohol obviously turns into a poison in our body. We are talking a small glass of wine here, and typically with food. But
right.
Recently in our good friend, the drinks business, as of last week, so everybody, we're actually recording this in December. So this is a December article. More studies, and they're not kind of new, but this one is focused on a small glass of red wine versus statins. So for people with heart, blood pressure, and all these kind of problems where they would normally take statins, which obviously do have side effects that you need to be aware of. But, if you've got no other choice, apparently they are saying that a small glass of red wine has better benefits than statins, which is just, it's amazing. I know, that, for many people, they can't get their head around that, but it's all about drinking responsibly, genuinely, to be able to get those benefits.
Right. And I also think that there's a huge, I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but there's a huge social benefit. The other day I opened a bottle of wine with a friend and we were planning on going out for dinner. We had this whole evening planned. And then all of a sudden, before we knew it, we'd had, I will admit, a large glass each. but like the conversation was flowing and we ended up just having a really special evening of just connection and reminding each other of all these different memories and moments we'd shared together. And I mean, that to me is what wine is about too. And that gives all of these health benefits that we can't really prove and we can't really study in a lab, but just human connection. I mean, there's like a crisis of loneliness around the world right now. We all know that. And connecting with a good friend or a family member or a partner over a glass of wine is really just, it's so special. And I mean, with the holidays coming up, that's another time. It's like a reminder there's a good side of wine, there's a bad side of wine. I mean, there's definitely things that you have to be very cautious about, but having a glass of wine with your loved ones over a feast. I mean, is there anything better, really? I mean, that's like what the human condition is kind of about, connection and community.
100%. And actually, one of the reasons why wine is such a beautiful social lubricant as opposed to cocktails and spirits and stuff is because actually it's less alcohol than, if you had 2 glasses of wine over the table talking with friends, you feel relaxed, you feel in a really good space. If you have 2 cocktails, you're going to feel it a lot more. And then maybe you start behaving differently. So you can,
exactly.
coming back to this high altitude thing as well, actually, if you're cooler climate as well, perhaps the same grapes are actually going to be slightly less alcohol as well.
Right. You're not going to be getting the 15%. You're going to be getting the old, like 1970s 13.5, which is, and like in Alto Adige, I mean, all of the wines there are, I don't think I had anything. I'm sure that there are wines there that are 14 and above, but really it's like a lot of it's 12, 12 and a half, 13, 13 and a half. And that feels, it's delicious. And also it feels better for me. I can have a glass and not feel like I can't get in, I mean, a small glass, I can't get in the car. And that's another thing that we're all getting more conscious about. It's not just our health, but it's about, I mean, I'm a parent. I don't want to drink and drive. And I certainly don't want anyone driving my children if they've had a glass of wine or two. So that's also something that I think, we have to kind of wrap our minds around. A 15% glass of wine, I won't drive.
No, precisely. And actually, that's now something that perhaps you can go into another article on the health benefits of high altitude alongside the lower alcohol shift. So I don't know, where are the best regions for that? So now you mentioned Alto Adige. Are there other regions that you found are really focused, that you've spoken to wineries in on high altitude or have had success, transitioning their grapes or focusing more on high altitude plantings?
I mean, the high altitude planting is really happening everywhere. Over the years, I've spoken to a lot of people in different regions. In South Africa, they have a lot, Argentina, Chile, and then, of course, California. I mean, you've got the Anderson Valley, and you also have naturally lower alcohol grapes and regions, as you alluded to. Right by me, I've got the Finger Lakes and Germany, of course. And that's another place where they're really going up in altitude. In Italy, they are going way, way up and really experimenting there. And I love the spirit of Italian viticulture in general. They're not afraid to embrace their indigenous grapes, and they're not afraid to just go beyond what their predecessors did, and they'll leave the vineyards that are just no longer thriving the way that they should have, and they'll go up, or they'll just experiment and also plan things differently. So people will, like I said before, in Napa, they're doing like California sprawl, which would have been considered like so ugly and hideous, even 20 years ago. But now they realize that shade really helps the grapes thrive and grow and have like sun dappling. And then they develop all of these more complex and interesting flavors as opposed to just exposing them to the sun.
So you're talking Californian sprawl.
Right.
And touching on the fact you said vertical shoot positioning earlier, not actually necessarily a great idea for planting in Napa, different climate to Bordeaux. But this Californian sprawl, is this a slang term for a type of canopy management?
Exactly. And so when I was in Napa recently, I spoke to the folks at Eller's Estate, and they're bringing up the fruiting wires as high as 50 inches. And this was after the winemaker Adam basically read this study that they did at UC Davis and with Bordeaux, showing how it can improve wine quality in really hot vintages. So you're bringing up the fruit higher, and then you're letting the vines and the grapes kind of sprawl out umbrella style. It's a little bit wilder. It looks a little crazy to us because we're used to, even though I think we've all gotten used to and love the cover crops, I think we're still used to very neatly manicured vines. So it'll be interesting to see how it evolves.
Have you found that from talking to any wineries about the high altitude plantings that they are having to adapt their canopy managements there or their irrigation techniques?
Yes. So they definitely have to. Irrigation is a challenge when you go up higher. So that's often something where they think about the rootstocks so that the vines will go down deeper naturally. And maybe they don't need irrigation as much, because if you're farming on a hillside and it's steep and you're way high up and it's a mountain, I mean, you just can't really. And also there are certain countries where you can't do irrigation at all. But as far as canopy management, yes, they have to change and not prune the grapes the way they would lower down, so that often there's grape coverage of the berries so they don't get sunburned.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I think touching on water, and I imagine as well on really steep hills, water is running off as well. So that makes things even harder. So I guess it's these things, steeper hills, it's harder to actually get machinery up. You've obviously got to adapt your canopy management, which is probably new for many winemakers. And the fact that then, can you irrigate? Are you allowed to irrigate? Are your vines actually going to be able to handle the lack of water? So it's probably, even though high altitude is a really good answer for climate change and for many wineries and for the quality, it's still not just a simple answer of just everyone go up high.
Exactly. You couldn't be more correct. And there's a lot of difficulty. Labor is more expensive. So can you get machines up there? Probably not. Do you have the labor? So this is not something that really high volume winemakers might necessarily be able to do. This is going to be specialized, very, very premium producers.
Do you think that it's always going to be for premium producers, or do you think that this is something that with more technology and time, everyone's just going to follow suit?
I think with more technology and time, it'll definitely be more possible. I think that they need to change. I mean, the machine picking has transformed in the past 10, 15 years even. So a lot of really high quality producers are doing machine picking and not having any issues. Whereas 20 years ago, if you were doing machine picking, it was a mass product for the most part. So yeah, I think it could definitely evolve. I mean, that's the wonderful thing about technology. I mean, now we have electric tractors. There are issues with electric tractors because they take so long to charge, but still, we're getting there.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Kathleen, for just touching on just a small amount of things that you've learned about whilst investigating wine. And for anybody who wants to just dive in and read some of the more interesting articles that you've written on, where should they find you?
I try to post my stories as much as I can on Instagram. So at Kathleen Willcox with 2 L's and Willcox is the best way. And I've really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you so much.
Oh, I've absolutely loved it. There's lots of topics that I'm like, timing, can't do that. But we have to do more. But for everybody listening, in the show notes as well, I'll put the link to Kathleen's Instagram. And thank you. We'll speak a little bit more another time. We'll dig deeper.
I would love that.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Cheers.
Speak soon. Bye.
Bye.
If you want to read more of Kathleen's articles, do go to my show notes to find the link. But next week, I will be joined by the incredible Sarah Crow, a doctor of chemistry turned wine communicator and a WSET diploma graduate. Sarah is a Ukrainian native and will be celebrating the remarkable wines coming out of her home country, a region with a very rich winemaking heritage that continues to persevere and innovate despite the tragic and challenging times it is facing. But now, just to finish off with a wine quote, I've chosen one that I think I've said before, but hey, listen, there's no such thing as the quote police. And so this is possibly one of the most famous wine quotes out there. It's from Galileo Galilei, who said, "Wine is sunshine held together by water." How could I not choose this quote when we've just finished this episode discussing how grapes closer to the sun at higher altitudes are producing some truly exceptional high quality wines. Now, don't forget to like the podcast, leave a rating and a review on the podcast app you're listening to, and please share this podcast with every wine lover you share a wine glass with. Share the wine love. Here is to a radiant and bright week ahead, regardless if we get the actual sunshine. Wishing you all very good vibes. And until Monday, wine friends, cheers to you.